Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another episode of Added Time, answering your questions that you kindly submitted for today's video. Got some interesting questions to get into and answer, but before we get into any of that good stuff, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit the like button if you're enjoying the content because it helps out the channel as well. Almost on the brink of 18k subs, so it'd be really cool to get there this week, maybe before the Spurs game next Sunday. So if you can help out, definitely hit that sub button and the notification bell. But let's get into your questions. Firstly here from Shreyas, who asks, with Premier League considering 5 subs again, would the green light on that increase Giroud's playtime, making him not leave for game time in January? In terms of the 5 subs, I think it's a good idea. I think it's becoming even more obvious now that we need 5 subs again. I understand the argument, and it's a strong argument in favour of, say, the smaller teams in the Premier League with smaller squads that they're going to suffer. But I think, say, from a fan's point of view and also from the players themselves, think about the quality of football we're going to get, say, post-Christmas. That's my concern. I always felt that this season the quality of football may be good in the first half of the season, but once we get to, say, February, March, April, and then we lead into a Euros at the end of this season, the quality in that competition is going to be really poor. And it may still be with players feeling really fatigued, but you see injuries post the international break, more and more injuries. I think it's so concerning, and I think that 5 subs, I think, will help that. Now, that doesn't mean that coaches have to use 5 subs every single game, but as to your question, I think it will help a team like Chelsea with, say, Olivier Giroud getting more game time, and hopefully that may convince him to stay a little bit longer. You've got to use your squad smartly this year, and it will benefit a team like Chelsea and maybe fringe players to get more opportunities more regularly. But my concern is just the players and the fitness of these players week in, week out, because we're getting into a ridiculous period already this season where so many players are getting injured, especially teams within, say, European competition. So I think 5 subs is a good introduction once again to the league, and hopefully, to your question, it would help a player like Giroud get more minutes under Frank Lampard and maybe convince him to stay for longer. Chelsea 1905 asks, would you bring Eden Hazard back at Chelsea? I think that Hazard, it'd be lovely to see him come back to Chelsea one day. I always feel with these type of questions, especially with players that leave, I think it's right to think about moving forward and looking at the players we have now and focusing on them, the likes of Kai Havertz, Hakim Ziyech, Timo Werner, the new players that have come in this year, but also the current, young players, Tammy Abraham, Mason Mount. You've got Ben Chilwell coming in this season as well. There's so many players in the current team to be excited about and think about the future. I think that we could have had this same feeling when Hazard arrived and, being upset that Drogba had just left. But, Hazard made his career at Chelsea, and became basically a legend at Chelsea. So I don't know. I feel that going back to old players, I think sometimes I think it's nice to just remember the memories Eden had at Chelsea, which were incredible. What he did at Chelsea, what he achieved at the club was incredible and will never be forgotten. He'll be remembered as one of our best players, especially most talented players. So maybe in the latter part of his career, he could return maybe for a year or two, maybe come back to a role, say, in the academy, helping players in a coaching capacity. I could see that happening, like with other players who are at the club currently, who had successful careers at Chelsea. But yeah, it'd be lovely to have him back, but I think we should be focusing on players we have, very exciting players who still got a long way to go in their development and could maybe reach the heights of Eden Hazard as well at Chelsea. David Branch asked, Dan, how do you feel Frank will look to tackle the January window? Will we be looking at bringing in that natural DM and going with what we have out with that? Or do you feel that there's more to be done in this window? Thanks, mate. So I think in terms of, obviously, the DM role is going to be, I think, the main priority. I feel it's the one sort of first team key position left to feel that we didn't get done in the summer. I've always stated that I think a lot of this has to do with who goes out. If Chelsea can't sell, say, unwanted players, can't get the right fees in, then I don't think a move for, let's be honest here, Declan Rice would happen in January. I think that's very much dependent. In terms of other places, I'm not entirely sure. I think you always have to be realistic about January and what can be done. I think unless you've put in the groundwork for a deal, a sort of a bigger deal before January, I think it's always unlikely a deal of that magnitude happens happens. And that's why I think, I found the frustration with last January quite baffling, because at the time I felt, there weren't many sort of first choice options available. Werner wasn't going to move in January last time and people were getting frustrated about that, but Chelsea waited and eventually got their first choice targets in the summer, and it may be the same case this January. We have a pretty big squad, and I think even if a couple of those players, really fringe players, move on, you're still going to be in a good position. I think the only concern for me is, say Olivier Giroud moves on, would Chelsea look to get another striker in? But then, I don't really want to go for short-term options, in that area. I'd rather Chelsea wait for sort of first choice targets. I think it will be about DM, and I think it will be about certain fringe players maybe moving on. I think that's the big thing to look at in January. Maybe one arrival and maybe two sort of players going out either loan or permanently. That would be my opinion in terms of it. But I don't think other than that there's key positions to look at. The only other place I'd think about is maybe backup for left back, but that may have to wait till the summer moving forward. Aaron Smith asks, when Thiago Silva is fit, do you still pair him with Zouma over Rudiger? Yes, I think it is a simple part, but sort of going in more depth, I think that Zouma is having an incredible season, probably the best of his career, just based on numbers. He's doing incredibly well. I mean, other than that Southampton goal, the equaliser where he, the back pass to Kepa, that shambolic goal, other than that, he's been faultless so far this season for Chelsea. Kurt has really stepped up to the plate, and I think a lot of that has to do with Thiago Silva, but I think he'll be really pleased with that performance on Saturday without Thiago Silva next to him, but still performing at a very high level. It shows that his improvement is, not just dependent on Thiago Silva being next to him. He can do it without him there. I think Silva's influence is going to be there even when he's not playing. I think that leadership role, probably the influence he's having in the dressing room at Cobham as well, I think is really helping our defenders this year, having that natural leader there with that experience and that sort of leadership and advice he can give to his fellow defenders. But I think obviously Kurt Zouma, he's just doing incredibly well, and he's a threat now at set pieces consistently as well. And I just think what he's bringing to us aerially, mobility wise, dominance, even a sense of leadership there is growing as well. I think it is big for Kurt Zouma. Rudiger's showing this season in the 2 appearances he's had, he can be a really competent backup to Thiago Silva when need be, and I wouldn't be stunned if he plays again in midweek against Rennes, just based on that rotation and wanting to keep Thiago Silva as fit as possible. So no, I don't think when everything's at full capacity in terms of players available, I think it will be Silva and Zouma. Why would you change that winning partnership? But I think Zuma's in the best form of his career. You don't want to change that. I think Rudiger will get a lot of time in rotation, especially those midweek games where Thiago Silva can't play every single game, but I wouldn't change the main centre-back partnership we now have in Thiago Silva and Kurt Zouma. Toby asked, The Athletic reported earlier in the week that Lampard is looking for a world-class long-term centre-back next summer. Who do you think Chelsea should go after? Will it be Declan Rice? I think Declan Rice is becoming more and more clear, although he could play there in his career. I think that's becoming more clear that he's being looked at as a DM rather than a centre-back, which I think makes a lot more sense. Versatility is key within Lampard's transfers and the recruitment. We've seen this over and over again, especially in attacking positions, but I do think DM is more likely. In terms of centre-back, I like to hear about this from Chelsea because they have to be looking at the long term. Thiago Silva is doing incredibly well at the moment. He's been an amazing signing for us, but you don't know based on his age, based on fitness, how much. And I think I answered this last week in terms of being asked how long will Thiago Silva be at Chelsea for. So it's hard to know, isn't it? I think 1 to 2 years, the maximum. Anything over that would be ridiculous. So I like the fact Chelsea are looking at potential options here, even though defence looks like it's improving and is quite strong at the moment. In terms of, I think Jimenez is always a name from Atletico Madrid that's been linked. I wouldn't be too surprised if that name is brought up again. There are other options. I think it's so difficult as we sit here in November to know what the target is going to be like, say, next summer. A lot of targets can pop up that you don't expect right now. I just think Jimenez is probably the most obvious name I'd pick out, but maybe there could be other ones. I just think it's a positive that Chelsea are looking at that as sort of in the long term to try and think about fixing that area. But it may not be, the case that we have to go out and sign someone. Maybe if Kyle Tomori gets a loan move, starts playing regularly, and he really improves in his career, and then Tomori becomes the obvious option that comes in. You never know, so you can't rule out that either. Neo Black asks, do you think bringing back Ruben Loftus-Cheek in January would be a good idea? I think he will be there for the season. I think there's a lot of time now where these loan moves are sort of set in stone. You can't really recall them unless they do have a recall option on Ruben or even Barkley. I think most of the time now you see that players will stick with a loan for the full season now. I think that's part of the deal. I think that Ruben, it was great to see him yesterday against Everton. He came off the bench. I have no idea why he's on the bench, given Fulham's situation, given their dire situation so far this season, why Ruben isn't in that starting 11. And it looked pretty ridiculous because the impact he had off the bench was really positive. He looked sharp, he connected play, he was really influential in the final third of Fulham. He won a penalty and also scored a goal that could have helped Fulham get back into that game. I think Fulham are a bit hopeless at the moment, especially defensively. You know, it's so easy to score goals against them. But let's hope that performance yesterday gives Ruben sort of the chance to play a bit more under Scott Parker and be a starting player, because he has to be. And as I said, I think when he made that loan move, it's probably a right move for him to be sort of the big fish in a small pond. He can go out there with a little bit more freedom, less spotlight on him, and really flourish again and hopefully get back to his best form and fitness. But I don't think he'll be returning in January, in my opinion. Daniel Sinclair asks, which teams do you think are in the title race this year? I think Liverpool, Man City, Spurs and us. Do you agree? Yeah, I'd probably think that. I think that just based on squad depth and quality, I said this, I think when I was speaking to Eunice last week, that I think that this period of games now will really start, I think, to set the bigger squads and the smaller squads apart in terms of quality, in terms of fitness, fatigue. I think you'll see this a lot more. Maybe not in the next couple of weeks, you know, of course there's still teams up there, but I think that generally once we get to say January, February time, I think you'll start to see those teams really start to go ahead, especially. And I think that it's a crucial period, of course, for Chelsea. I've been a lot more cautious in terms of us being in a title race. I think Liverpool's battering of Leicester last night, I think, should give you sort of pause for thought in terms of thinking it's a really open title race. I mean, Liverpool, even with all those injuries, still was so impressive last night, and they've got some key players out, so they're still going to be a threat. I think Man City are losing games at the moment, and you know that loss to, I think, Spurs is a real big moment, especially for Spurs, and Chelsea Spurs playing each other on Sunday. I think we'll get a better indication of the strength of those teams in the next couple of games as well. It's really hard to know. I would say that Liverpool, obviously, I think will be defending the title this year. I think they're going to be in that title race. I think Man City in the long run will be there as well, and I think based on current form, you've got to say both Spurs and Chelsea look like the two teams most likely to challenge sort of that established top two. So yeah, I'll agree with you there. Calvin H asks, why hasn't Chelsea moved on from Andreas Christensen? He doesn't appear to be a good fit or pairing with Kurt Zouma. He gets bullied constantly by opposing forwards, does not read the game very well, is too indecisive and quiet on the pitch, and is not good in the air. I pretty much agree with you there. I was quite stunned, and I'm probably going to be making a video on, say, for Fikayo Tomori. There's rumours linking him with a loan away, which isn't that surprising. I'm consistently baffled by Chelsea's sort of belief in Andreas Christensen, as I say, in terms of his performances and this constant sort of link we've heard internally within the club reported that, you know, they worry about sort of a second sort of KDB situation where they let him go. He turns out to be an amazing defender for someone else. I think we've seen enough of Andreas Christensen now to make a judgment on him. I don't think Christensen, despite my reservations about him, is an awful defender. I think he's had some really impressive performances for Chelsea. I think my biggest issue with Christensen, and I think this is something that Alex Goldberg has picked up on in his podcast, is there's a lack of sort of dominance about Andreas Christensen in terms of strong opinions about him. He can look very nice and sort of elegant on the ball. I actually think at times he can read the game quite well. I don't think that's his issue. I think the issue of Christensen has always been in games against more physical teams, as you point out. I think it's too much of a weakness. I don't think he commands his area very well. I think it's too easy to boss Christensen in a game, and you can't have that weakness in such a physical league like the Premier League. The reason why Chelsea are backing him is because of his passing, which I understand for a team that wants to be on the front foot, and his passing can be very impressive, but that's not the only part of being a centre-back. You need to have that physical dominance to you. You need to be able to deal with a variety of forwards and attackers in different situations, aerially as well, especially in the Premier League, and it's too much of a weakness for me. I don't think he's a big enough personality for me to really dominate that area for Chelsea. I think he's too easy to get by. I've seen enough of him now to make me believe that there are those weaknesses that are just going to be a part of his game, and there's no doubt that technically Christensen can be a very impressive player. He's got the technical ability to thrive in the modern game as a centre-back. I just wonder if he doesn't really fit in at Chelsea anymore, and I'd be stunned if this time next year he'll still be in the Chelsea squad. I think that even if he's a rotational player post-Christmas for Chelsea, I can't see him being a mainstay, because I just don't think when the chances he's got to be in the Chelsea first team, I never think he's properly imposed himself consistently enough to really impress me and make me believe he can be a long-term option for Chelsea at centre-back. And finally, Manhandled CFC asks, when Pulisic and Havertz are back, do they slot straight in, and who do you drop It's a difficult question, and I'm sure it's a difficult question for Frank Lampard to answer as well. Based on the current form of the first team, it's very hard to drop any of that sort of consistent starting 11, especially in attacking positions at the moment, based on their form, based on how well it's working. Timo on the left, Tammy Abraham flourishing up top. Why would you drop Tammy Abraham at the moment? And Timo, despite, in front of goal on Saturday was quite poor, is still offering a lot to the team, and he's finding those spaces pretty consistently now, and you back him to score goals consistently as well. So why would Frank Lampard change something that's working? The one thing I would say about both of these players is, number one, they're both young players. They've still got a long way to go. You sort of throwing in the towel for any of these players, I think, is absolutely ridiculous, especially in the case of Kai Havertz, who's only just signed for Chelsea. So I think that's ridiculous. So they've got a long way to go in terms of their development. So a lot of time to play at Chelsea and to get better and really make their names in the first team. Both have shown real quality, especially more Pulisic, of course, last season at Chelsea. And I also think it's just a long season, isn't it? I spoke about this earlier in the video in terms of 5 subs. If that gets reinstated, both of these players will have an opportunity to get back into the first team, and things can change so rapidly in football. Form, fitness, certain players, Pulisic could come off the bench, Havertz could come off the bench and really change a game, and then suddenly you think, and it could be a big game, either of these players, depending on, of course, Pulisic's fitness, but Havertz could have a world-class performance against Spurs, and he's right back in the first team. I think Frank has always showed his ability to be flexible and to bring players back into the fold when you think they may be out of it. I think Rudiger's another great example this season. So I wouldn't concern too much. I think these players have got quality. More of my concern goes towards Pulisic and his consistent injury problems. I think if he can sort out those, he's going to be an incredible player for Chelsea. I still think that. So I think both of these players will get into the first team. I just think, it's difficult for me to tell right now, because these next few games for Chelsea are going to be really pivotal. And I think after then, we'll be able to make a better judgment on sort of the strongest starting 11, at least in my opinion. But that is it for this episode of Added Time. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch it. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonofChelsea. Have a great day, and I'll see you again.